Now, there is no doubt about it that Snow White 2025 is by far one of the worst disasters by the Walt Disney Company that so happens to feature Rachel Zegler, which was another mistake by Bob Iger, the Disney CEO, which I do believe is the worst CEO in history over at Disney, definitely outperforming the Chapek era. But one thing is for certain is that we know that they are still doing a lot of damage control related to this film. We know that Bob Iger and Rachel Zegler still to this very day are on the damage control train for this movie. Whatever time they have left to keep this thing in the theaters, it only has a couple of days left, to be honest. If you look at the mass majority of the overall theater chains that still have Snow White in the actual theaters, it is beginning to drain out as we speak. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you all so very much for the great and kind support. So, one thing about Gal Gadot is that she's been very silent about the whole situation related to Snow White, about how unorganized the production really was, how unprofessional it was both behind the scenes and in the public eye, and everything else that dealt, of course, with the setbacks, right? We know that a lot of those, like Gal, Mark Webb, and among others, dealt with a lot of issues with Rachel Zegler on the set, really being very difficult to work with, and that's just the start of everything here, because now Gal Gadot is finally breaking some of course, silence here about the overall issues related to the production of this film, Rachel Zegler, and even Disney as a studio. Let's get into this, shall we? Now, what's interesting about this yet again is that we know that this movie in isolation is just a terrible movie, alright? Putting DEI all to the side here, and all agendas aside, it's just a terrible movie across the board. However, with the Snow White drama now heading to a whole new level as Snow White begins to head out of theaters at a record-breaking rate, one major development going on now involves more to do with Gal Gadot calling out Rachel Zegler and putting her in the hot seat, as well as Disney when bringing up the production issues for Snow White. Now, Gal delivered the following: the most important thing when you are working on a film is teamwork, and when you have characters like the Evil Queen and Snow White, you expect teamwork to play a role in the creative process when you are trying to put something special together. We didn't really have teamwork, and there were many setbacks that we had to deal with during this entire process, and I just found that to be very exhausting. When you are acting, you expect your co-stars and the creatives to go all the way and to support each other, and we just didn't meet those expectations. And I just felt it was not a streamlined process. I think this industry can learn a thing or two based on why our film didn't really meet expectations with the fans. There was an obvious disconnect there, and that's all on the corporate ladder, something that is out of my control. But you know, you try new things, and I just don't think it worked for me. You need a streamlined process with teamwork, with your proper co-stars to do something special. Without that connection, you lose creativity and motivation, and you fall into very unprofessional scenarios. I will say this, things needed to be done way differently for this film. We weren't really organized or prepared, and it was difficult to work with some of my co-stars. But when you are creating a film that's centered on Snow White and the Evil Queen, there really needs to be an agreement to act professional and to have that motivated energy. And I didn't really have that, and there are things I really think I shouldn't get into right now, but this is a very difficult production, and for reasons that could have been avoided. I can only hope that other studios can learn a thing or two on who they cast in their films and the teams that they incorporate into their projects. So again, let me just stop there for one moment. She's obviously being very careful to not say Rachel Zegler. We all know exactly who she's alluding to. It's very, very obvious. And she's also calling out Disney when it comes to how unorganized everything really was, how much, of a setback they were dealing with time and time again, over and over. They had 3 rounds of reshoots. I mean, you can only imagine how much of a nightmare that was for a lot of the people that worked on this movie when it came down to the crew, when it came down to the animators, or even, people that played in the movie, right? But what's interesting about this yet again is the fact that you have now Gal beginning to call out Disney, beginning to call out Rachel Zegler in a very professional way, in a very more, cordial way, I should say, to a degree. If it came from Rachel Zegler, believe me, it would not be done professionally. It would not be done in a way that would be very much, streamlined like Gal Gadot actually is saying here. She would just go all out and just blast people, and that's just what she does. That's just typical Rachel Zegler. So, again, I think that Gal Gadot has had it with Disney. She's beginning to kind of really break at this point, and this really, I think, is a major sign that as this movie is spilling out of theaters, I think that you're having moments where Gal is becoming more comfortable, really kind of just shedding the truth on things, and she kind of goes on about this. Now, she goes on to allude further, I think those that follow me will be satisfied when I am more comfortable to share more details on the specifics, but for now, it's something I feel is not the right time to jump into. I will say this, that the critics out there have valid reasons why they felt disconnected from the material in this version of Snow White. I totally get it on how it shifted away from something so recognizable in pop culture, and that was a serious mistake that could have been easily avoided. I just hope that perhaps one day we can see other stories of Snow White and how that can be explored. That will be quite something to see. But I will never stay silent over things that bother me. We could have done so much better with this story. It was a missed opportunity for sure in certain areas. So again, I feel like that Gal is still kind of on the fence of really unloading on everything. You know, she's obviously poking at Rachel Zegler. She's obviously calling out Disney here about how unorganized they really are, how much of a mess they really are with this movie, how they could have done so much better, how they could have hired better, a better cast and crew to work on this film, quite frankly. And that's exactly why you have a lot of setbacks, right? That's exactly why they dealt with a lot of creative differences. You have people like Mark Webb, you have people like Greta Gerwig and Erin that worked on this movie that really wanted to do something completely different that shifted away from the traditional 1937 movie and the Brothers Grimm tale. You know, instead of a prince in this movie, well, you get a bandit, right? You get an outlaw, you get a thief as the quote-unquote love interest. And this is just typical Disney. They always like to downgrade the male characters. This happens far too often, right? And that's exactly what people have been calling out, right? People have been calling this out for years upon years now, and that's what they've been doing in multiple brands like Marvel, Star Wars, and among others out there, even the Disney live-action remakes now, such as Snow White. But overall, I would really love to hear what everyone has to say about Gal here. She's obviously way more professional than Rachel Zegler ever will be. If this were, of course, a scenario that was put in Rachel Zegler's shoes, essentially, where she was calling out Gal Gadot, believe me, she would be naming her, of course, she would be calling out her name, she would be saying all this outlandish garbage out there, and Gal's trying to just keep it together. She's trying to just, be very much fair and professional to both the studios, to even Rachel Zegler in a way, but she's also calling them out. She's really putting them both in the hot seat. She's letting people know that she's had enough. She doesn't really want to deal with this nonsense anymore. This is why you hear a little or anything of coming from her, and this is another example of how much of a disaster Snow White really was at the box office, and of course when it came down to the reception, right? The reviews were abysmal, even the test screenings were abysmal, and that should have been the first major red flag that Disney saw that, yeah, maybe this movie's not going to work at all. But overall, I would like to hear what everyone has to say about all this below in the comments, everything ranging from the whole Rachel and Gal drama to now Gal breaking silence and everything else in between. And if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.